Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Now, our panel tonight is the Conservative MP for North East Somerset, Jacob Rees-Mogg, the former Tory MP who defected to UKIP and then lost Rochester at the last election, Mark Reckless, Labour's Emily Thornberry, who came unstuck in Rochester, sacked by Ed Miliband for tweeting a picture of a white van, and who's now on Jeremy Corbyn's front bench team as Shadow Employment Minister. And one of the SNP's new members of Parliament who leads for the party on business matters, Hannah Bardell. And the journalist and broadcaster, Piers Morgan. And thank you very much. As ever, if you want to join in the debate from home, you can do so. Text or tweet. Our hashtag is BBCQT. You can follow us at BBC Question Time. Text comments to 83981. Push the red button to see what others are saying. Oh, and by the way, we are on Facebook too now, so you can like us, if you like. First question tonight from Kevin Chapman, please. Kevin Chapman.
Even if David Cameron was to get agreement in Europe, would his changes go far enough for a vote to stay?
As they all sit round the table having dinner in Brussels. Jacob Rees-Mogg.
No. I think that what has been asked for is fundamentally trivial, that three parts of it, the EU to be competitive is something the EU wants to do anyway. The euro ins and outs, well, the only vote they've had of this kind, the other euro outs didn't support us anyway, so there's not much to be had in that. The free movement of people, taking that out of the preamble, is entirely irrelevant. If the whole text of the treaty creates the ever closer union of people, just taking it out of the preamble doesn't change a thing. The preamble is not the legal essence of the text, the main bulk is. So that leaves you with this thing on benefits. Now, first of all, experts have said, the Office of Budgetary Responsibility said in the Treasury Select Committee that this would not make much difference to the numbers who came here. Secondly, I think it's a dreadful way to think of brave people who move halfway across a continent to come and work here, that they're simply coming to grub for benefits. They're not. They're coming here to change their lives fundamentally. They're taking a risk. They're leaving their families, their friends, and they're doing something at great sacrifice to improve their life and the lives of their families. And to say they're doing it because they're little better than benefits cheats is, I think, a really awful view of the people who come here. I think they come here... And so, to conclude, I think we need fundamental change on the free movement of people. We need to control our borders so that we are fair in our treatment of people who come here from India as opposed to people who come here from Bulgaria. I don't see why we have this open-door policy for the EU, but incredibly strict regulations on anybody else. So I think what is being asked for is fundamentally trivial, and we need to be asking for more. And if we don't even get what we're currently asking for, the whole renegotiation is a waste of time.
So when you said it was... When you said what Cameron was asking for was thin gruel, you were declaring that you will vote out.
Had the Prime Minister gone for a proper renegotiation, I could have been persuaded to vote to stay in. But if we stay in now, we are voting to join a full federal Europe. We are staying on the pathway towards an integrated EU. That is what they are doing across Europe. We are just a little bit behind, but that is the route map. We need to pull out of that and re-establish our own control of our own affairs.
Piers Morgan. Piers.
Well, I agree with some of that. I mean, look, David Cameron has proven to be an absolutely atrocious negotiator. I mean, I wouldn't trust him to negotiate my purchase of a cheese and pickle sandwich. Never mind our position in Europe. And I think that...
Sorry, what's wrong with his negotiating style?
Well, like he said, gentleman to my left, he asked for very little. He's not even going to get that. It's humiliating. You know, he's going to come back with a bit of paper in his hand and say, great news, I've managed to establish that English people can carry on speaking English. It's a huge victory, and I'm a triumph. And that's basically what this comes down to. He will have achieved nothing, even if he achieves what he's trying to achieve. So I think it's very embarrassing for our country. I think he has let us down in the negotiating room. Clearly, the Germans and the French in particular look at him and, in a poker game, they've called his bluff. And unfortunately, they hold all the aces. And so, look, I'm a European. Most of us here, I'd imagine, are Europeans. I actually think this is, as John Major said the other day on the Today Show, which I thought was a perfect way of describing this, it's the worst possible time, isn't it, for England to go back to being little England, detached from the European Union when we're facing this chronic migration issue, which has to be resolved, and we're also facing the worst terror threat that we have faced in my lifetime.
Is it not the issue as well, though, that he is doing the two at the same time? That instead of standing up to UKIP and standing up to the Eurosceptics and saying, actually, no, we're going to have a negotiation first, he's trying to do that and come home and placate people at home with an EU referendum.
He's trying to achieve a Pyrrhic victory, which I think, even if he achieves it, as Jacob said, is meaningless. But I don't think he's even going to achieve that.
Hannah, what do you think he should have done? What should he be doing?
I think he should have been making the positive case for Europe, negotiating on that basis, because what he's done is gone to Europe and just really annoyed everybody over there, because they know that he's back home he's essentially trying to face both ways. There are many, many positive aspects to remaining within Europe. It brings huge business, particularly in Scotland. We have, billions, and across the UK, billions of pounds of investment reliant upon the EU. There is a positive case to be made for that. But what he has not done is made that positive case. And, I'm not normally likely to agree with Piers, but I do.
Really? Why?
I think
we're getting on very well in the Green. What's the matter with you?
But there is a point here that he's doing it in a way that is with one hand tied behind his back.
And do you think the result is?
He should have been stronger.
Do you think the result is going to be that England votes out?
Well, if you go by the polls just now, we could be in the position that England votes to come out, and then the devolved nations, other nations of the United Kingdom, including Scotland, are taken out of Europe against its will. We should have a quad lock. We should be in the position that those other nations get a say in that. And Alan Johnson has said, he said he could see a reason why people would be particularly upset in the devolved
And Nicola Sturgeon said that, in effect, there'd be another referendum from Scotland if Britain pulled out.
She's said that we will look at the conditions under which any future referendum would be held. But it could be one of the things, you have to go by what your people feel. And ultimately, at the moment, the majority of people in Scotland are pro-staying in Europe.
OK, let's come to one or two members of the audience, then I'll come to you. The man in the front here. Yes.
What I want to know, and what the British people want to know, is will there ever be a situation where David Cameron can renegotiate the free movement of people?
Emily Thornberry, what do you think?
I don't think you can renegotiate a free movement of people. I think that the European Union is based on the idea of a free movement of people and the free movement of goods. I think that's kind of fundamental to it. There's a Schengen agreement within Europe, which means that people can move freely around Europe without needing to show their passports. Now, clearly, if Europe are going to keep that on the continent of Europe, they need to do a great deal more in terms of sharing security information, because you can't have people moving from Brussels to France and the security services not passing information. So it seems to me that they need to do a great deal more work on Schengen. We're not part of Schengen, right? You still have to show a passport in order to come into Britain. But nevertheless, the EU is based on that. And, that is how it is. But I just don't think that we are in a position as a country to start cutting ourselves off from the rest of the world. As the world gets smaller, as we get closer to one another, I think the idea of Britain sailing off into the Atlantic and possibly losing Scotland and as becoming Little Englanders is something which deeply worries me. I think that David Cameron is playing games with the future of this country, and I think that he's doing that in order to be able to keep, to ride the many-headed tiger that is the Tory party. I think that there are Conservatives who will never be placated. There are some that might be, but he's prepared to have a gamble. And he's having a gamble with our future. And actually, part of being in Europe is about jobs, it's about growth, it's about investment. In Slough, there are more, I think, international HQs in Slough than in Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland put together. Slough is an internationalist place, and actually it benefits from being part of the European Union. We have to be realistic about this. I'm not saying it's perfect. I think there's lots of things, that should be changed. And what I would do is I would say that we are part of Europe, we are Europeans, and we want to get together with other people who think the same way and be able to change it. For example, with state aid, right? If you want to spend state money, you need to make sure you get as much bang for your buck as possible. So if you're having a contract with an employer, you can say, right, we're going to give you a government contract, but we expect you to have a certain number of apprentices, a certain number of local people, we expect you to train people up. At the moment, the European Union rules are very hazy about that. We need to be negotiating on things like that for the sake of the country.
Yeah, let's go back to where we are, which with the negotiations that are going on today and tomorrow as a start. The man up there in spectacles, what do you think?
Just go back to your earlier point. Couldn't we be like Switzerland and be successful outside the EU?
Okay, and you said in the front, yes.
Can I just say that all the defence of Europe is a defence of the economy. What about defence of society? I think that's what people are more concerned about.
Can you go a bit further, explain what you mean?
Well, if you talk to older people, older than even I am, they are very, very concerned about the changes that are happening to our country. Now, time and again, the argument is based around the economy. It's not based around British society itself and the values that Britain stands for.
So the immigration, the implication is immigration is the thing that you need to control. Is that what you mean?
I don't personally believe it's something that we need to control, but I do believe that that is a major concern in our society.
All right,
now,
and,
yes.
you in the front row there, and then I'll come to you,
I
Mark.
agree with what the members of the panel who have spoken already have said. I really think that David Cameron is alienating a lot of other nations in what he's going to do tonight, and I think there's a lot of things wrong with the EU, as all the members of the panel have said. And what he's doing is actually going backwards at the moment. He really needs to be trying to build those relationships in a means to make the EU better. And I think, yeah, that really needs to happen.
Just before I come to Mark Reckless, is there anybody here who approves of what the Prime Minister's doing or trying to achieve in Brussels? Who'd speak up for it? Yes, you, sir.
Wow, one hand.
Well,
Oh, two.
it's best to be alone than have no representation whatsoever.
Quite right.
I certainly would agree with him because it is not an easy task for him. He's trying his utmost, his very best, to come up with whatever good is required for this country. In that respect, I would say yes, he is doing his best.
And do you think the vote will go in favour? I mean, the question was if he gets what he's going to try and get, that will get Britain voting to stay in. Do you agree with that?
I would still want to see a referendum, nonetheless.
Mark Reckless.
I mean, he's virtually asked for nothing, and it's not even clear he's going to get that. I'm sure at the last moment he'll bring some sort of rabbit out of the hat, and all his fellow leaders and some of the media will big up what he's supposedly achieved. But I think what David Cameron has shown with this renegotiation is not what he wanted, of pretending that somehow the European Union was going to be better in the future rather than voting on what we know it to be. But he has shown just how little influence this country has. Since he was elected as Prime Minister, he has voted 40 times against measures in the Council of Ministers in the European Union, and every single one of those 40 times he has been outvoted. And now, at the time when our leverage in Europe should be greater than any other, when we're about to have this referendum and the polls are so close, even then, rather than actually giving even the minimum he's asking for, Europe is saying, no, that's not the way we do it, it's not in our interest, we want to go in this different direction. I just think we need to recognise that if other countries, the European Union, wants to be this ever closer union, wants to become 27 or 28 countries that become essentially one for the key tasks of a state, then that is not for us. And I think there's no shame in that. We should have friendly relations with the European Union. We should have free trade with them. But we don't want to spend £55 million a day to have 27 other countries make laws for us that we could much better make for ourselves. We need to lift our eyes to the horizon and trade freely with the whole world, not focus on one declining continent of it.
Philip Markwick, you had a question about this, and I'm just interested in your take on this. Do you think the other countries of the EU are being unreasonable faced with...
I'll ask the question.
Yeah.
The UK seems to have reasonable requests. Why is the EU flirting with a Brexit?
The UK seems to have reasonable requests. Why are they flirting? Jacob Rees-Mogg, why would they risk Britain leaving?
Well, I'm afraid my view is it's all a great charade, that we've asked for so little, and they're just making a fuss about one thing, so that when we get one little bit of it, everyone will say, fantastic triumph, glory for the great British leadership, hail to the chief. But I think it's all an absolute stitch-up. I imagine this was agreed a long time ago. If one reads the papers, it basically comes down to, does Mrs. Merkel approve? And if the Chancellor of Germany approves, we'll get it. And a few months ago, it looked as if she did. I expect that after a long session, we will get most of this fiddly little thing on benefits. The other three are just not serious things to ask for. They are no change. The gentleman's absolutely right. That the European Council is not flirting with Brexit. It's going to allow us to appear to have a phony victory. And I don't think the British electorate will be fooled this time in the way they were in 1975, when they were told that there had been major changes, and there hadn't been any changes at all.
How many Tories will be on your side of this argument, do you think, if he does come back with what you call a phony fix?
I think the numbers are growing every day. We get bigger and stronger. I think if you talk to... if you talk to fellow Conservative MPs, a lot of them are very cautious on this renegotiation. They are perhaps more dutiful than I am, and duty and loyalty are very attractive qualities, which I probably ought to have more of, to the leader of our party. But I think as we get closer to the referendum, more and more people will make their views clear. If you go to the Conservative Party in the country at large and Conservative associations, they make me look like a pro-European. So I know exactly what the Tory Party is.
Isn't the real problem here, though, that we're basically, because of Cameron's behaviour over this renegotiation, we are basically drifting into a potential scenario where actually we may have a referendum which leads to us leaving the European Union. It doesn't get much more serious, particularly if that then triggers Scotland, which is very pro-European, in my view, quite rightly, then says, well, you know, solve that for a game of soldiers. We're out of the United Kingdom. So this is actually very big stakes. And not a time for the British Prime Minister, in my view, to be playing silly games, which is what I think he's doing. A lot of his audience clearly share that view, but more importantly, so do the other members of the European Union. That's right. And I think that, you know... let's face it, they are probably right.
I mean, some people talk about it as if it's going to be some sort of amicable divorce, as if, you know, you could have Britain as one party and Europe as the other party. It's not like that. It's like if we're all thinking about Christmas, you know, a group of brothers and sisters meeting up and one strops off. What happens? The others continue, and they don't have anything to do with them. People talk about, you were talking about Switzerland. Why can't we be like Switzerland? I don't know if you remember the Prime Minister of Norway saying that, you know, we're outside Europe, and what happens is we get faxed information on what it is that we're supposed to do if we want to engage with Europe and trade with Europe. We don't need to be told from the continent of Europe how we trade with Europe. We need to be absolutely right there. And it's not right for Mark to say, oh, why can't we just trade with the rest of the world? Our biggest trading partner is the rest of Europe. Let's get real.
Can I just say
basically, we would be in the worst possible position.
All right, you young man there. Yeah.
I'm an A-level politics student, and I'm studying the Constitution and a doctrine of parliamentary sovereignty. And I find it quite disgraceful that our politicians, throughout the last 30 years or so, have eroded the doctrine of parliamentary sovereignty without even asking the people. I think that's frankly disgraceful.
The man in the red pullover there, you, sir.
Ask the panel, do they believe that the majority of the English public have enough knowledge and information and understanding of the EU to make a vote constructively, or will they just be emotional votes?
What do you think?
I think all the people I've spoken to, some of them are well educated and some aren't, it's going to be emotional.
I trust the people, as I do at general elections, that the British people in their votes get good governments again and again, and the governments that they want. And I think the mass decisions of millions of people actually are better at getting the right answers than a few of the elite. So I trust the people against the establishment.
But the gentleman makes a very good point about engagement, and I think that that is exactly right. The opportunity to engage and to be educated positively about the issue that's going to be put in front of you. We did that in Scotland.
Absolutely.
At the referendum. We inspired a nation, you could say, whether you were for or against. The fact that we asked people the big questions, we gave them the opportunity to be in charge of their future in a democratic way. Now, unfortunately, that's not what is happening here, and it is not going to be that kind of referendum, because we are running out of time.
The advantage I can see that I've got out of it, that I've seen as a real advantage, that I understand, I don't have to keep changing my money when I go on holiday.
Excuse me, I mean,
yeah.
the crux of what I was trying to get at is,
yes.
Do you think the Prime Minister is pursuing a negotiation in good faith or not?
No, no,
I certainly
not.
think the Prime Minister is acting in good faith, yes.
Do you?
Of course I do, yes.
Because I don't think he
He's
is.
behaving
He
in
doesn't
good
want
faith.
to be quoted saying anything
No,
else, but he doesn't
I would
mean
say that privately. I would say that privately. I trust the Prime Minister.
You say something in private you actually said in public?
Absolutely, I always do.
Very,
I always do. I'm
very unusual thing for a
I
politician.
believe in saying the same thing in
Jacob,
private and public.
I don't-
I've always trusted the Prime Minister. I continue to trust the Prime Minister in good faith. He is doing his best as he sees it, but I fundamentally disagree with the approach he is taking.
Jacob, I don't trust the Prime Minister. You may remember a session when we were both Conservative MPs, and I asked the Prime Minister a question about the European arrest warrant. He'd previously argued against it, yet he then sort of turned round and with apparent sincerity said that there was no other way in order to sort of tackle terrorists and we had to go down this path. He promised a vote in the House of Commons on that before the by-election, which I fought, and he broke his word on it. And what he is doing with this renegotiation, or at least trying to do, is choreographing it, so as well as being the captain of one of the teams, he gets to set the rules of this referendum. And that isn't right. But I just wanted to take up a point about the devolved administrations and what we heard from Hannah. Actually, what the SNP did is it argued that there was going to be this sort of honey and sort of sunlit uplands for Scotland, because the oil price was going to be at $120 a barrel forever. In fact, it's at $40. The idea that we vote to leave the European Union, that the Scots feel so strongly about this, and the case for independence is, Hannah would claim, so strong. It is absolutely preposterous to believe that Scotland would vote for independence when the black hole in its finances is so enormous. And as far as Wales is concerned, we actually saw a poll recently in Wales that saw more people voting to leave the European Union than wanting to remain. So I think we can come out as a united kingdom and once again govern ourselves.
So he says there's no risk to the union.
I'm glad he gave me the opportunity to speak about the oil price, because it is something that has been peddled out by the unionist parties and the anti-European Eurosceptics time and time again. Let's be very clear. Scotland's economy is just as strong, and we are just as well off as the rest of the UK per head of population without oil and gas. Now, nobody got it right on the oil price. The OBR's forecast was actually further out than the one that we had in the white paper. But let's be clear, the whole point of having independence and having control over your own affairs, whether it's that as a nation or as a region, is that you have the control and the ability to do with your resources what you feel is right. And in 2011, the coalition government, as described by the local Chamber of Commerce, committed a drive-by shooting on the oil and gas industry by hiking up taxes. There's not been a stable tax regime. We would put in place a stable tax regime, and we would manage it in an appropriate
but hold on.
way.
If you want this independence for Scotland, why do you want the United Kingdom to be ruled by Brussels? Surely there's an inconsistency.
All right. Okay.
I think the United Kingdom as a whole is much more able to be independent than Scotland.
All right.
Well, we are a strong enough economy to do far better for ourselves than we do in the European Union.
At European level.
We'll take it one step at a time. We've got the negotiations, then we've got the referendum, and then we'll have no doubt questions about it.
But it'll be good for Labour and the
happens.
SNP to be campaigning together to be able to be part of a union of nations. I look forward to that.
Well, if Labour could unite on anything, that would be good.
All right. Let's go on, because we've spent a lot of time on that. We're back after Christmas, I should say. This is our last programme before Christmas. Well, it better be. We're back on the 14th of January, and we're going to be in London on the 14th in Limehouse. And the following week, we're going to be in Belfast. And the details are on the screen of how to apply. I want to take another question now. Let's take this one. Hannah Ishak, please.
Do you think our military involvement in Syria is contributing to the radicalisation of Muslims in the UK?
Do you think our military involvement in Syria is contributing to the radicalisation of Muslims in the UK? Hannah Bardell.
Yes, I think there is a very good chance that it is. I have to say, as a new MP, sitting in the House that night that we voted to bomb Syria was pretty devastating, actually. I believe that I voted the right way, not to bomb Syria, because the reality... The reality is that there are a whole number of countries already bombing Syria. So to go in there just to join in, just to do something, it's as if we had to do something because nothing wasn't an option. Nobody was suggesting nothing. We were very supportive of the Vienna Agreement, which was about sensible transition to a stable government, which was about engaging and working with international partners, something that the UN was very keen on. But what many people that have come out of Syria have said is that bombing is not going to solve the problem.
But the
it
question
will only marginalise...
the question is it contributing to radicalisation?
We are attacking an ideology. We are not just attacking individual fighters on the ground. We are attacking, going after an ideology. And it is so important that we have to try and understand that and hit it at its heart. So stop the flow of money that is coming through oil, attack their cyber and digital technology. None of that's been done. We're not even bombing Raqqa. And the Prime Minister stood up on the 2nd of December and said, we're going to hit them where it hurts, we're going to hit them in Raqqa. And the Defence Secretary has already reeled back from that and said, well, we'll get round to it when we find a strategy and we've worked out what we're going to do.
You're answering a different question. The question is what we're doing in Syria contributing to the radicalisation of Muslims in the UK?
Yes, because I think people feel that there's going to be more displaced people, more chaos on the ground. But I also think that Muslims in the UK will realise that, you know, as everybody does, that the extremists are nothing to do with Islam. They're nothing to do with the Muslim tradition. And we have to call them out for what they are. Daesh are terrorists, they are a faction, and they have nothing to do with that religion.
Jacob Rees-Mogg.
I think it's a very interesting question to which there is no very straightforward answer. There are certainly examples historically when the counter-terrorist actions that are taken lead to greater activity by the terrorists. That is known from our experience in Northern Ireland, where the early response, particularly internment, led to greater support in the local community for terrorism. Why I don't think it's the case now is that the radicalisation of some people in this country predates our bombing of Syria by quite a considerable time. So there was already this risk, and relatively small numbers of people going to Syria from the United Kingdom to be involved in that particular fight. So I don't think the bombing over the last 2 weeks has had a particular effect on that. But I also think, as the more general point, the effect you get of a crackdown on terrorism is more likely to be domestic than it is to be international. So on balance, I think no.
Okay. What do you think, Hannah?
I don't think it'd be fair to just be looking at Syria here. If we look at London itself, only recently there was an attack on the tube. So from it happening in Syria, it's always going to affect what's happening back home. Also, the people who, you know, did the bombing in France, they weren't Syrian. They were born in Europe. So we need to look at what's happening home before we attack anywhere else.
And you're, yes. So you think it is? You think it is a contribution, in other words?
I think it certainly contributes. There are people who already have an ideology in the Middle East, or even here, who think that the West are evil, or the West are having such a negative impact on them. So by the West actually, you know, confirming their suspicions, they're only going to be more radical.
Emily Thornberry.
I think there is something about some of the wars that have taken place in the Middle East and a feeling amongst some people that Western lives are more important than the lives of Muslim people in the Middle East. And I think that, so you will have the Prime Minister, for example, talking about a city as being the head of a snake, and if you're bombing that city, there will be civilians who will be killed, but not talking about those civilians and not being aware of that, which is why I was not prepared to vote for the bombing of Syria, because I felt that it just simply wasn't part of a strategy that made any sense. I don't think you should go into a country and destabilise it even more than it is, and then walk away again and think that your own country is going to be safer. Because I think if you look at where we have been involved in military action over the last few years, we have not necessarily made those countries any more stable or made ourselves any safer.
Right.
And I think the sort of the alienation, the feeling amongst some people who, you know, who've gone through Ramadan, who've gone through starving along with Muslims across the world, and who feel that there are some people in Britain who just don't consider some lives as being as important as others. And that is obviously completely wrong. And we have to be really clear about that. You know, we have to be really clear about what we're doing and why we do it. So, I mean, there are many other reasons, I think, for the radicalisation of people. I don't think that it's to do with wars. I think there's also making sure that people feel that they have a place
the main
in the
reason,
UK.
surely, for the start of radicalisation, and I suspect in Britain and many other countries, was the senseless, illegal war in Iraq, right? And the reason I think it's really important to understand the history here. You know, when we went to war in Iraq on completely bogus claims about weapons of mass destruction, and we did so, in my view, illegally, what we did was we created a hornet's nest, which we then didn't try and repair. And we just decamped, and we let Iraq burn. And through that burning came ISIS, who were basically representing a bunch of people who'd been bombed and were poor and just desperate and thinking we need something that we can attach ourselves to. That's where this all started. But that doesn't mean that the military action in Syria is wrong. Because let's ask ourselves why we sent in air power when we did. We did it after the absolutely appalling scenes on the streets of Paris, where ISIS bombed football stadiums, they bombed restaurants, they bombed music concert venues. They tried to attack every form of Western life. If that had happened...
How is bombing them going to help that?
Because let me explain. There is a multifaceted way that you deal with an enemy like ISIS. They're not like Al-Qaeda. They are a geographic territorial ambition group. They want to take over states. They want the world to become an Islamic state in their likeness, which is a terrifying prospect, by the way.
Is it effective, deciding to extend the bombing to Syria?
I think you have to do something. These people will stop at nothing.
Yeah, but you see, politicians who want to be seen to be doing something.
Let me finish.
Are politicians who should be very worried
I heard
about.
what you said.
They have to have a plan.
No, this is the plan, I think. From a military point of view, if you're going to combat these people on the ground, which is they're in Syria and in Iraq, you have to do it in a multifaceted way. You've got to attack the money. They've got trillions of dollars coming in from their oil revenues, for starters. A lot of it from the very people that we're siding with. So it's a ludicrous load of hypocrisy. You've got to attack them politically, diplomatically, and when it comes to the military action, you've got to have, in my view, and it was promising to see the start of this, the Saudi-led coalition this week, where they may put boots on the ground of Arab boots on the ground to combat what is an Arab problem. But we need to support them with air power because we have sophisticated air power.
Are you saying, Piers,
you can't win it without air power?
Are you saying that it's not contributing to the radicalisation of Muslims here in Britain, which is what Hannah's question
I think what is happening in Syria is now a trigger for it being used as an excuse, but the genuine radicalisation started from Iraq.
All right.
And that should never have happened.
Fine. The woman there in the centre has been patiently waiting.
I think, obviously, our aggressive foreign policy is a contributing factor, but don't you think that a large problem is, look at the people that are voting to take this action. It's white middle-class men. There's no good examples for Muslim children. I was speaking to a leader of a Muslim school in Slough recently who told me that he invited a police officer with a big beard to come and meet the children to show them that they do have opportunities in this country, because I don't think that they believe they do.
All right. The man behind you was shaking his head, I think, immediately behind you as you started speaking. Yes, you, sir.
Yes, sorry. I think we're fundamentally missing the point. I think ISIS and Al-Qaeda are a vehicle for this particular ideology. What we have to do is tackle the root of where this ideology stems from. And it's agreed that this stream of Islam is called Wahhabism from Saudi Arabia, and it's Saudi Arabia which has been exporting and funding this type of ideology. And the fact is, the UK and the West have a very close relationship with Saudi Arabia, so that's where the root of the ideology and the root of the problem is coming from. And before we deal with that, that's where we need to look at first.
Okay. And you up there. The woman there, yes.
Yeah, we're taught, like, from pretty much as soon as we can walk and talk, that violence isn't the answer. So you go in, you spend £100,000 on bombing a country, but have no money to help the hundreds and thousands of people that are now fleeing that country. It doesn't make any sense to me. You go in and, like, we are portraying ourselves as these people who bomb a country to prevent people from being angry at us. Like, it doesn't make any sense. We're planning.
Well, no, we're trying to stop them.
All right,
we're
hold
trying
on.
to stop them beheading people and stoning gays to death and marauding around committing the atrocities we saw on the streets of Paris.
You're not going to stop.
You've got to stand up to these people.
Piers, you made
You've got to defeat them militarily.
Mark Reckless, stop all talking at once. Mark Reckless.
I think people who've been making these decisions have really been all over the place. I was listening to Emily just now saying we shouldn't just vote to bomb without any plan, and how now under Jeremy Corbyn she's against bombing IS in Syria. But unless I'm much mistaken, Emily, you voted previously for bombing IS in Iraq, and before that you voted to intervene by bombing in Libya, from which we're still suffering the consequences.
And I can, And I tell you what happened was when we were asked by the Iraqis, Iraq is a mess, and I agree with Piers that Iraq is a mess after we had gone in. But I was on the demonstrations against being involved in Iraq. I was completely against the Iraq war. But the fact is, we went in, and Iraq is now the country that it is largely as a result of our actions. And so, if the Iraqi government asks for our help to fight ISIS, and they have boots on the ground, and they have their own troops, then in those circumstances, yes, we back them up. It's completely different to
We're
Syria,
not talking about the decisions.
where they don't even have
we're
any
talking
boots
about
on
the
ground.
effect. I must bring you back to the point. The question was about the effect of these things on domestic Muslim people in this country, and whether they feel whether the accumulation, in particular of Syria, is a further
and to the extent
radicalisation.
it does have an effect, and I suspect it will be mixed. Some people will react differently, and some people will pervert their religion, and they haven't succeeded in other parts of their life, and they will jump on this as the thing that can give them significance. But it's the same whether it's Islamic State in Iraq or whether it's in Syria. And what we hear from the Prime Minister, it's like he thinks this is unfinished business, that we had this vote that he lost before to bomb Syria. But that time he was trying to bomb the regime, Assad. Now he's trying to bomb the other side, IS, who are fighting against Assad.
And you, sir, with spectacles there in the third row. Yes, you.
There's a gigantic chasm between peer-reviewed academic evidence-based research on counterterrorism and terrorism and the jingoistic kind of rhetoric we hear in the media about, they hate our freedoms, it's about ideology, we're at war with an ideology. The consensus in the academic community is that ideology is incidental, not causative. The causative factors are much more like things like despair, things like alienation, things like feeling that certain people are separated from wider society.
Are you talking about this country?
This country and many others.
Well, that's what I was trying to say.
All right,
the
let him finish
picture
his
that
point.
you have of a family with little children going off to Islamic State because somehow there might be a better life for them there.
Absolutely,
It's just
absolutely.
terrifying.
The point is, if we talk about things like ideology, we're falling into the same trap of the same rhetoric that was used even in word for word in colonial times, when people would of colonial British colonies would resist and fight back. They were labelled as extremists. They were labelled as, there's something wrong with their ideology.
I just want to come back to the lady on the edge saying we won't do anything to help in Syria. The British people, that's us, taxpayers, have spent £1 billion to try and help the refugees in Syria. We've done more than any other country other than the United States to do this. And I think this is very important. I'm not usually a great fan of overseas aid, but I think this is absolutely the right way to spend it to help the most troubled people, the most at-risk refugees.
We're closing up now.
We have done more than anyone else.
There is a naivety about the use of air power if you're going to try and defeat them militarily. Ask anybody in the military. Can boots on the ground defeat ISIS without air power? No, they can't. So if you sign up to the idea ISIS must be defeated, at some point you've got to acknowledge we need air power. I'm afraid it's just a military necessity.
But and boots on the ground.
Yes,
we hope
supporting the boots on the ground. But you can't
All
win
right,
that.
I want to move on to another
But not
question
ours,
because we
but
have 20 minutes left and we've got 2 more questions I'd like to get to, if I can. for the sake of our audience getting through the questions they want to ask. Pam Grant, your turn.
If Donald Trump becomes president of the United States, would it upset our special relationship?
All right, Mark Reckless. Mark, you start on this.
I think it probably would. It is absolutely extraordinary that a man such as Donald Trump, with the views he has expressed, is polling, I think, around 40% of likely Republican voters. Now, I don't believe he's going to get the Republican nomination, or still less become President of the United States. But to think he might get the Republican nomination, and then if something blew up with Hillary Clinton, all those sort of emails, something else came out, that actually you can paint a scenario in which he does become President of the United States. I think that would be very unwelcome. But I think Donald Trump he's gauging something. There's something happening in America, but also in Europe, probably in our own country. There's a huge disconnect between the politicians and the public. And there is, instead of a free market, there is a crony corporatism and a belief that however you vote, the power has all gone to people who aren't accountable, whether it's the European Commission or judges or quangos, and actually people who want to make a difference over their own lives. They want their democracy back. And that's why I want to get out of the European Union. And I think probably in America, it's something in a way I don't agree with, but it's something that Donald Trump is expressing.
How did you get the European Union into a question about Donald Trump?
Yeah. We get to the European Union into everything. You say yes. Come on, quickly. You.
Last time I checked, over 400,000 people had voted against Donald Trump being allowed into the UK.
Yeah, now 500.
Is over 500, in fact. So is that going to be seriously debated in Parliament? As
Well,
the people have spoken?
Should it be?
It should be.
Why?
Well, that means 65 million people didn't, of course. So
Okay.
it's all relative.
All right, you have a go at this, Piers Morgan.
Well, look, I've done this show 19 times. Somebody informed me yesterday, and
Which
I'm
show is
about
this?
Question time. You are a show, aren't you?
No, it's a programme.
A programme.
He's been in America. Thank you. Thank you very much indeed for saying that. Thank you.
I would like to apologise for
Now make your point.
denigrating your programme.
Now make your point.
Your programme, 19 times, and I'm about to get the biggest cheer I've ever had in the 19 times I've appeared, because I've known Donald Trump 10 years. His judgment is very sound. He made me his first celebrity apprentice in America, and I consider him to be a personal friend. Exactly. So, to me, I'm slightly alarmed at the way this has played out for him. I didn't understand what the whole "we're going to ban Muslims" stuff was about. I wrote a column attacking him for it. But I do understand on a separate level why he is resonating with the American public. And the reason is that they are fearful. They're very fearful that they are now heading towards another 9/11 scenario following what happened in California 2 weeks ago. And he's tapping into that fear. He's also totally different to any other politician in America. He speaks his mind, he never apologises, he's bombastic, he's a showman, but in a way, he's a slight throwback to how America used to be when it was a chess-beating, all-dominant superpower. And to underestimate him is to make a big mistake, in my view. He's a very smart guy who knows exactly what he's doing. We may not like it, but trust me, banning him from Britain will not make any difference.
The question was, if he becomes president, would it upset our special relationship? In other words, would it be a different Trump from the one
in a way, that
seems to be upsetting people at the moment?
I actually don't think so. Banning him would be a bit difficult, obviously, if you couldn't let the president into the country. But I looked at what Vladimir Putin said today about him, and it was quite interesting. He was talking him up very warmly.
Brilliant and talented.
Right. And whether you like him or not, Trump, you don't get to get $10 billion empire without being fairly brilliant or talented, even if he's offensive.
Doesn't seem to go down too well in Scotland, does he?
No. No, and I would like to think that Nicola Sturgeon, our First Minister's, led the way on this. She removed him from the Global Scot network, removed him from being an ambassador for Scotland, and he's also had his honorary degree.
A what? Yeah, who made him ambassador?
Alex Salmond.
Exactly.
Let's be clear.
You liked him when he suited you, didn't you?
Well, he invested in Scotland. He has a number of businesses there. And the people who work, there are 20,000 people work for the Trump organisation. Presumably, they do not all hold his views. So it is not they or the areas that he has his businesses that should be disadvantaged. what he should do is apologise. He should apologise for views that are abhorrent, that are divisive and have no place in our society.
Which particular views and to whom?
Well, the views about banning Muslims. That is just, it is abhorrent. It's a ridiculous thing to suggest. And, you know, at the end of the day, we share a lot across the ocean with America. We've exported Piers Morgan. I think there are some exports we might have...
No, I've come back.
Might happen.
I've come
we
back.
would have left there.
I've been re-imported.
The woman here on my left. Yes.
Hi. As Jacob Rees-Mogg said, if in terms of people voting, the people's vote is the true vote, if the people of America vote for Donald Trump, then that's what they deserve.
Jacob?
I think the lady's absolutely right that we have to trust democracy. I'd say two other things. First of all, I think we overstate the special relationship, and that we think that we have a very strong relationship with the US, and the US doesn't lose a lot of sleep over what the United Kingdom thinks, and I think we should be cautious about that. The second is that I think we have a tendency to think all American presidents are deeply stupid. We thought that of Ronald Reagan, we thought that of George Bush Jr.
Obama?
We don't think that of Obama, but we thought of Bill Clinton, that he had certain problems in the fidelity area.
That doesn't make him stupid.
Doesn't make him stupid, but we like to look down on American presidents because of the way they appeal to their electorates. And they appeal to their electorates in ways that are too populist for the British political system, and we don't like, and they say things which go down very badly here. But if you want to give a great boost to Mr. Trump's campaign, ban him from coming to the UK, because it would run so badly in the US. They would think the UK had no business banning an American presidential candidate. It would boost his support. It would mean that somebody who we think it will be difficult to deal with, who was friends of Mr. Morgan and Mr. Putin, so he keeps very fine company.
That is a low blow, Rees-Mogg.
I meant it in a friendly way.
Are you likening me to the Russian dictator?
Well, you're a very powerful figure.
The gentleman there with the spectacles and the moustache.
I think if he is democratically elected, he should not be banned from coming. There's loads of leaders all over the world who have said things or believe in things that we don't agree with.
Do you think we could get on with him as president? That was what was behind the question.
Yeah, sure, because that particular aspect is one aspect of many aspects that a president carries. But what I do fear, though, is that if those are his genuine beliefs, going back to the previous question, he could then become a catalyst for radicalization if he expresses his views in these terms.
And the man behind you. Thank you. Yes, and you, sir.
I was going to say that in terms of the previous question about radicalisation. Right. This is a man, he's got an audience of 300 million in America and the world now, and he's beating his chest saying Muslims don't come into my country. He's saying he's going to, what was he going to say? He's going to ban mosques, he's going to close mosques. He's making Muslims the enemy within America. And so those who are on the edge of sanity and about to be radicalised, that's him. Right. That's the message.
Emily Thornberry, and then I'll come to you.
I think that we have had presidents in the past that have been ignorant of world affairs, have not, have not known very much about the world outside America. We have had American presidents who I don't think have been particularly bright. We haven't yet had a president of the United States who indulges in cheap and nasty racist slurs.
Well, we have quite a few who supported slavery historically.
Actually, we've had
that's true.
There have been a lot of American presidents who've been racist.
All right, guys, in my lifetime. But it is now, but the idea that we might have someone like Donald Trump being president of the United States is, I think, frankly, appalling. It's appalling. Of course it will affect the relationship between Britain and America, and if it didn't, I would think much less of this country. I certainly hope that if he does get the Republican nomination, and it looks like he might, but who knows, their polls may be as bad as ours, if he does become their nominee, then Hillary Clinton will become the first president of the United States. And wouldn't that be fantastic? First woman president of the United States. And she certainly knows about world affairs. She's certainly bright. She's certainly been through the mill. She's as tough as anything. And I think she would be an excellent president.
You, sir, last point, and then we'll take another question.
Yeah, I mean, he's obviously been the president and will be allowed in. But I think he just needs educating and introduce a few Muslims over here. Because he's got this wrong idea that certain parts of London are no-go areas. The police are frightened, they're scared of Muslims. He just needs educating.
Okay.
Like
So
most
maybe
Americans.
he should come over. Okay, I think we've got time for one more question, which we absolutely, given where we are, we must certainly have. Duncan Reid, please. Duncan Reid.
Will Heathrow expansion provide the promised number of jobs, and can this justify the cost to the environment?
This is the building of another runway at Heathrow. The Prime Minister is deferring a judgment until after the summer. Will it provide the promised number of jobs? Can it justify the cost to the environment? What's your view, as a matter of fact?
Well, Heathrow Airport Limited has not complained that the Davis Commission report has happily traded the shortening of people's lives for profit, and that cannot be right.
And that's what you think is the shortening of people's lives for profit. Who would like to go on this, on Heathrow? Emily Thornberry, now you were just talking. Mark Reckless, you start on this one.
Good. Well, I will start again, and I will be criticised for this, with a point about the European Union.
Oh, no, please.
And I will do this. The reason David Cameron, our Prime Minister, has said that he's going to delay for another 6 months taking a decision is to see whether Heathrow could have a third runway, yet still meet the European Union legislation on nitrogen dioxide emissions. Very, very, very dangerous, kills a lot of people. And partly because of all these diesel engines that, again, the European Union has encouraged through its regulations and has allowed to come onto our roads, despite being nowhere near meeting their own
what's your answer to the question?
So, that is where we are on Heathrow. I think it's a really serious...
that's it, is it?
Well, no, but look, no one knows if you can build a third runway. Because the legislation and what they pass in Europe is so unclear that this massive decision for our economy is held up. What I believe, what UKIP believes, is that instead of expanding Heathrow, we should expand Gatwick, have a second runway at Gatwick, allow Gatwick to compete with Heathrow, and that we should get on with doing it.
All right, thank you. The woman in the third row there. What's your view? Thank you, Mike.
I just wondered whether the panel believe that the decision on Heathrow and the can being kicked down the road has got anything to do with the mayoral elections, London mayoral elections.
Perish the thought. What, Jacob Rees-Mogg, you know the inside workings of the Tory party.
I wish I did. I think that's a shockingly cynical view. And I can't imagine that such a thought would have entered the Prime Minister's head. But if I may answer the main question, I think we absolutely ought to extend Heathrow. Heathrow is the most convenient London airport. I realise that in Slough this may not please everybody. I used to live not a million miles from Slough with the aeroplanes going over, and I must confess they didn't prove too bothersome then.
Eton, was that?
That's absolutely right. I was I was at school with your son.
Fantastic.
But I think it's crucially important economically.
That was a brilliant thing. That's the best thing I've seen him take in a long time.
Let's get back to the important subject of Heathrow rather than mine and Henry Dimbleby's education. That we need a functional airport that is close to London, is well connected, allows us to compete internationally, has all the routes to China and the Far East, and every project we come up with is stopped by a particle, a bat, a badger or a newt. And we can't allow... There's always some environmental thing...
A badger and a newt?
Newts stop endless building projects all over the country. We can't build roads because of a newt. We can't build a house because of a bat. Well, what about people and thinking of the needs of our economy and the British people?
I want to get some views from the audience. The man in the blue tie there, you say, yes. Quick views from the audience, and I want to bring everybody in. We've only got 3 minutes left. Go on, sir, far away.
Why is nobody looking at the big picture? Boris has suggested an airport in the estuary, moving it there. It costs a lot of money. It would create a lot of space, very valuable real estate at Heathrow. It will create a lot of jobs out in Essex. It can be connected, a lot of money, but a new garden city at Heathrow will house up to 250,000 people, a new Canary Wharf larger than that. It would be a fantastic asset.
Emily Thornberry,
and that's a
you agree with
long
him?
I think the Boris Island was always discredited. I mean, the moment that Boris said it, I think it was one of these sort of Boris fantasies. But what I would
he says you haven't looked at it.
Have you really studied it?
Oh,
Have you read the studies?
there were many studies of Boris Island, because they would come back and they would say to Boris, "I'm sorry, it doesn't work," and Boris would say, "Oh, well, I'm going to commission somebody else then," and somebody else would have a look at it, and it isn't viable.
Have you looked at it?
So the answer I want to give,
it's very unpopular in Rochester.
And the answer I want to give is about the fact that, you know, studies show that 10,000 Londoners' lives have been shortened as a result of pollution. And I think in those circumstances, it isn't a particle; it is people's lives. You know, we've seen the Supreme Court saying that the area around Heathrow breaches the EU Air Quality Directive. We have to look at that before deciding whether or not we're going to have another runway in Heathrow.
This is because of diesel. If we'd stuck to petrol engines, we would not have this problem. So we want to re-encourage petrol and get away from diesel.
Can you run aeroplanes on petrol?
No, the diesel in cars that causes the pollution of people going to the airport. That's the problem. It's not the pollution from the aeroplanes.
Okay. The woman there on the gangway.
The expansion of Heathrow is going to add £100 billion to the economy, and the top two-thirds of businesses use the Heathrow airport to import and export goods. Isn't that not helping the economy by providing us with goods?
All right. Piers Morgan.
In the time that we have dithered over this, and in the time we'll actually take any decision after endless inquiries which seem to then establish another inquiry, China has built 80 new airports, never mind just extra runways. The reason Europe is seen to be in decline, which it indisputably is around the world, is precisely because of this kind of nonsense. Heathrow is a world-class airport. It's a massive asset to this country. And frankly, we should be looking at not just one new runway, but probably two. And I would build another spanking new airport just outside the M25 with travel into central London. And I would make ourselves the European hub for anyone coming from America or China or the Middle East or wherever. And I would do this fast so that we can actually seize the moment and not let, as Willie Walsh, I saw the BA guy this week, saying, we'll take our business to other countries.
Okay.
This is a dangerous situation for our economy.
We're over time, I'm afraid. So, Hannah, I'll just bring you in. I don't know what Scott...
There is one other reason. Boris Johnson,
Hannah.
Boris Johnson said he'd lie down in front of the bulldozers if it came to it. If that doesn't be a win-win, I don't know what
I'll tell you what, I'll solve the problem for you all. Just bring it to Scotland.
All right, fine. On which note, thank you very much. I'm sorry to those of you who had your hands up. At our time, we're overrunning. We have to stop, otherwise we get our knuckles wrapped on this programme. If it were a show, I've no doubt, you know, we'd be allowed to go on as long as we were...
I'd be hosting
as long as we were enjoying ourselves. Yeah, well, your day may come. Very happy Christmas to everyone. See you again in the new year. Good night.